first of all, good afternoon, and I apologize for not being able to attend. Personally, I was actually last week in India, but this week I had to be in the office, so I will give the presentation remotely. So if you can go to slide number 2, that's a bit of an overview about who I am and what is Radiflow about. So Radiflow is part of the RAD group, which is an Israeli group of companies for many years, providing solutions in different ICT areas. And Radiflow was founded about 4 years ago, focusing on the utilities market. And when we have started to look on this market and analyze it to see where we can provide some value add, we came across the area of cybersecurity as a place where we estimated there is going to be some gaps. And in the last year, we actually started some deployments, and we see that the awareness for cybersecurity in utilities is growing by the day, and also the examples which make it relevant are coming every day. So this is the place where we are focusing, and this is where I will share with you some of my experience in this market. If we go to the next slide, it is important to understand that when talking about smart grid, many people relate it to metering applications. But it is very important to understand that in most of the cases, metering applications might be the first application, but it is for sure not the last application, and in many cases, this is not even the most important one. So you can see here a part of the India Smart Grid Pilot definition for the applications, where you can see that many of the applications are not related to metering. And the same you can see here from a market research about the US, where you can see that the green part, which is about automation, is actually becoming bigger than the right one, which is about the metering part. So you see that the action part is actually becoming even bigger than the blue one. And what is important to understand when looking on this part of the migration of the trend for focusing more and more about applications which are related to automation is that it has also a direct impact about security. And I've listed here some of the impact. One thing is that regarding automation, this is a real-time application. It's not like metering where you have a concentrator that is collecting the data and can send it now or can send it in 1 hour. The impact will not be a major one. In automation, when you need to tune some of the devices in the field and you want the behavior of devices in the field, you need to do it on a real-time basis. So you need to make sure that your security is not disturbing this kind of a real-time performance. You also need to understand that for automation devices, unlike the metering part, which is a new application with new devices, for the automation part, this is a lot of legacy devices, legacy SCADA protocols, legacy devices. So you need to take into account that these devices and these protocols don't have the security characteristics built inside, so you need to make sure that you are putting them on top. And the last thing is that when talking about automation applications, in many cases people are starting from an application which is from the center to the devices in the field, but when looking on some of the more advanced applications, like for example microgrids or some of the peak load management, then we are talking also about peer-to-peer communication. Similar to what happened in the internet when there was a shift to peer-to-peer communication, the same we are seeing in the smart grid applications where there is a shift towards this kind of communication, and we need to take this into account also in terms of the security part. If we move to the next slide, when talking to utilities about cybersecurity, there are a few things which are the first, I would say, automatic response of the utility. The first thing is that there is a private network, not connected to the internet, not connected to the enterprise network. The operational network is a separate network, which is a very good start. But unfortunately, when talking about the smart grid network with thousands of sites, it's sufficient because these are very small sites, and once you get access to one of these sites, you can also manipulate the devices in other sites. And you can see here also some statements about from the US Congress. So we need to understand that actually the private network is still a big threat on its own, and we need to make sure that we have sufficient security inside this internal network. The second part, which is usually implemented by the utilities, is all kind of access control mechanisms on the internet level, on the IP level, in order to try and prevent unauthorized devices to be connected to the network. In this area, the experience from the enterprise world of 30 and 40 years, where we have found already a lot of problems, a lot of loopholes, where you can bypass this kind of access control mechanisms. And here there are just a few examples, but you can find a lot of them in the IT world. So you need to make sure that you are putting additional levels of security, and the best way to do it is just to learn what was done in the enterprise world, in the IT world. The operational network for sure is different, does not require the same solutions, but we first of all need to learn the problems and the evolution that was done in the enterprise world, and then to decide what is applicable for the operational network. If we look on the next slide, as was mentioned by Annabelle, we need to do an assessment, a security assessment. So here we have done some generic assessment because, as was mentioned, this is a specific case, but this is a very generic assessment of a smart grid network where you have the control center, you have the data center, and you have some of the secondary substations where you can have a meter concentrator and some automation devices. And then we have analyzed the security, the main security risks, the potential attack vectors for this case, and what are the security measures that need to be implemented. So, for example, if you have somebody being able to attack the control center to get some different key with some malware or some update which includes some virus to the devices in the control center, then they have full access to the rest of the network, so they can start to generate some malicious commands to the devices in the field. The way that we are looking on this kind of an attack, and we are proposing to prevent it, is of course there will be all kinds of measures of security on the hosts in the control center. But again, looking on the IT world where there are all kinds of zero-day attacks, where the best way to prevent them is on looking on the external behavior of the host and not just on the host itself, we are also proposing here something similar, to put an additional firewall which is looking on the patterns or on the behavior of the traffic generated from the control center to the rest of the network, and detecting anything which is beyond the normal operation, which also needs to be done on the service level. It cannot be done just on the IT level, on the Ethernet or the IP level. It needs to go to the application level to understand the normal patterns, the normal flows of the operation, and to try and detect what is going beyond this kind of flow. The second threat is the problem that somebody can get to one of the remote sites and from there to get to the other site. So the solution for that would be to have the same level of firewalling, the same level of analysis in each of the sites and not just in the center. And then there are security risks which are more standard, like man in the middle, which means that somebody can penetrate the middle of the network, the cloud itself. So we need to use encryption where we have such a risk. And there is a case where you need to open your network for a technician for some remote maintenance, and then we need to make sure that we are providing this kind of technician a very strict, a very secure remote access. So this is just a snapshot of some of the key risks that we see in such a smart grid network, and what are the security measures that we believe that needs to be deployed in such a network. If we go to the next slide, so zooming inside on the issue of the distributed firewall deployment, here are three options how to do it. The first solution will be to go to the devices, to the RTU, to the devices in the field, and to expect that they will have the required level of security, the required level of authorizations and authentications of the users and what are through the valid operations. This is, of course, very efficient because it is integrated in your end devices. The problem is that once you find some new attack vectors, and since this new market attack vectors, then as Anna mentioned, you cannot do an upgrade of the security of the RTU every week. You need to do it in a very strict way after you have done a lot of tests, which means that you will have an impact on the operational stability if you have this kind of security integrated inside the devices. And of course, the other problem is that you already have a big install base of such devices, which are not supporting this kind of modern security. The other option is to put the firewall as a standalone device, kind of a mini firewall, what you can find already in the control center, put a mini firewall in every secondary substation. The benefit is that this is available technology. The problem is, of course, the overhead. This is additional power, additional space, additional cost, additional network complexity, makes it very problematic for the actual deployment. Then there is some kind of a solution which is in between, which means let's look on the communication infrastructure, which we anyhow need to deploy in the new smart grid applications. In the access devices, in the gateways for each of the secondary substations, let's try to integrate this requirement of firewall which looks on the smart grid application. The benefit again is of course the levels of the integration and simplicity. The problem is of course that we need to make sure that we have the required level of devices with this kind of technology, and this kind of technology is now emerging, so we start to see some of the vendors which are providing this kind of integration of the firewall dedicated for the SCADA command inside the access switches, the access gateways for the smart grid application. Another thing which is important to note, that if we are looking on this kind of a solution of security distributed in the network, the best way to do it would be to look at it from day one, from the first installation of the network, which is the opportunity to do it in the right way, and not to do it as a second step, because then you start to compromise on the places that you can add already this kind of security and where it's too late. If we look on the next slide, this is an example of what it means to have this kind of a firewall on the application level. So you can see here again the typical network where, for example, from the control center, you can modify the behavior of the RTUs in the field, and if somebody is coming from another secondary substation, this bad guy in green, then you should only have, for example, it is allowed to have from another secondary substation some monitoring of the information in another RTU, but it is not allowed to have reconfiguration of the devices in other substations. Which means that if you look here on the top level side, you need to be able to configure per source and per destination what kind of SCADA commands are allowed, whether you can do only the monitoring command or you can do also the configuration command. And of course, there are much more details about the valid operational flows and what you need to configure in terms of the rules, but that's just a simple example. If we go to the next slide, as was shown in the previous slide, we have an important part of the security is about provisioning of the security rules and about management of the network with these distributed firewalls, which is a big challenge. Also, if you look on the enterprise world, the modern companies which are addressing the firewall part for the enterprise are focusing on this area of distributed management. We believe that this should be also taken into account as an initial part of the deployment for the smart grid. Otherwise, once you start to deploy this kind of a distributed solution, the operational problems that you will run into will just cause you to put it aside and run without the security. So some of the main things which are important for such a security, for management of the security, is first of all, of course, to have the provisioning done in a view of an end-to-end, not just on a per firewall, because this is too complex to define the security rules per firewall, but to do it on an end-to-end basis. This is my control center, these are my RTUs, these are my repeaters, these are the roles and functions of each of the devices, and this is what is allowed to do and not allowed to do, and the system should automatically translate into the specific security rules per firewall. Another important part which we have seen from our experience with customers is that you need to support your customers with some learning, because they already have some network ongoing, working for a while. They are not necessarily aware of everything that is going through their network. So they need some ability to monitor the network, to learn what is going on through the network, and then to analyze it and to decide whether this is a legal basis which can be used as a basis for the normal security. Of course, you need also to look on the events, on any security breach. You need to see it in an aggregated level, so not just on a specific site, but the view of the whole network. And you can also use this kind of events which are coming from different locations as a second step of security. Also, correlation of events coming from different locations can give you a better indication of an attack. So it might be that you see different events, which each of them on its own might be okay, but if you see the correlation of them, then you can see that somebody is trying to access each of the RTUs one by one in a very speedy manner, which means that this is not supposed to happen. So these are the main highlights of things that you should have in the management system And again, these are things that were learned in the enterprise networks for many years, and we need to make sure that once we go to the smart grid applications, we try to take the same concepts and, of course, implement them in the way that is relevant for the smart grid application. If we look on the next slide, so trying to summarize everything that I've mentioned in this presentation. So when looking on this requirement to have the security distributed inside the network in each and every site, we need to look on the basic communication building block that is existing in every site, which is kind of a gateway, a communication gateway for the remote site of the smart grid, which is of course already ruggedized and have the required communication capabilities and all kinds of interfaces. But we need to put inside this device as an integrated manner the additional levels of security in terms of the validation of the SCADA command, remote access for a technician, encryption for access between the sites and so on. And we should have on top of that, on the network level, the management that will enable you to do it in a very easy way, the ability to activate all this kind of security. And then if we look on the last slide, just summarizing, as was mentioned before, smart grid for sure will be a high-profile target for cybersecurity attacks because this will be the critical infrastructure of the nation, and this is a very advanced one that will enable you to make a lot of damage for the power infrastructure. So there are many cybersecurity threats in it because this is a lot based on communication and IT. We need to make sure that we have the right level of security of defense in depth implemented throughout the network, and we believe that the most efficient way to do it is looking on the communication infrastructure and in each of the access points to this network to implement the required level of security. And you have here my contact details. I will be glad to continue the discussions on more detailed examples and the specific cases of each of the utilities. Thank you.